The best Thanksgiving gift is the day Dad disappears. My daughter said that at the dinner table just as I set down the turkey. The smell of butter, cinnamon, and roast meat couldn't cover the sudden cold that spread through my chest. I looked at her, the little girl who once held my hand through blizzards, now sitting there, speaking with empty eyes like I was a stranger. My son-in-law poured more wine, smirking. If you're gone, this house won't feel so crowded. My two grandkids stayed silent, faces buried in their phones. I didn't say a word. I just lowered my head, slowly cut the first slice of turkey, and set it on the empty plate in front of me. I chewed, swallowed, and smiled. In my head, I had already started a countdown, 14 days for a gift they wouldn't see coming, because when I disappear, the only thing that truly disappears will be their easy life. If you're still here, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Every comment helps this story reach more hearts, and if it moved you, give it a like so others can find it too. My name is Isaiah Cole, 66, a retired welder in the suburbs of Chicago. I live in a 2-story oak frame house I bought with my own calloused hands in the years I spent breathing steel smoke at the Joliet mill. I used to call that house our home. But tonight, hearing my daughter, I understood. To them, it's just an asset to split, not a memory to keep. Renee, my only daughter, sat across from me in a cream sweater, a gold bracelet on her wrist, glossy nails. I used to be proud she was educated, employed, married. Now I saw a woman practicing how to say cruel things without furrowing her brow. Trent, her husband, leaned back, topping off his red wine. He spoke half joking, half serious, like he wanted to throw gasoline on the fire. Honestly, Renee's right. Old folks should live near a nursing home. Once you're out, we can open up the living room. The kids will have more space. I heard his low laugh. The knife on the plate scraped through meat with a sharp ring. The room, once warm with candlelight, felt like a freezer. I reached for a pan, cream-colored envelope I'd prepared, and set it in front of my daughter. "I'm giving you $5,000, I said quietly, my voice rough. "To cover that credit card you said is past due." Renee didn't look at me. She glanced at the envelope and said, barely above a breath, "Thanks. But you don't need to keep doing this. I don't want another lecture every time I take money." I let out a dry laugh. A lecture? I thought I was helping. Whether it's help or control, that's something only you know. She lifted her head, eyes cold as if cutting the last thread between us. I went still. Claudia's photo, my wife, hung over the mantel, catching candlelight. I looked at her face, gentle smile, deep brown eyes, as if she already knew everything. If Claudia were alive, she might have known how to speak so our daughter wouldn't turn into a stranger. Now all I had left was silence. The air felt heavy. I stood, cleared plates, and walked to the kitchen. Water roared from the faucet. I let it run to wash my hands and drown out my heartbeat. I thought I knew loneliness, but the kind you meet in your own house, that's different. The kitchen door swung open. Renee stepped in, leaning against the fridge. "Do you know how tired I am? It's always about money and paying you back. I don't want to live like this anymore. Trent and I decided to sell this house. We're moving to Arizona to start over." I dried my hands and looked at her. "This house is mine. I've paid the mortgage for 16 years. You live here. You don't own it." Renee scoffed, arms crossed. "Right, you pay. And you stamp your name on everything to keep us tied down. You don't want anyone outside your control." "Control?" I said, slow and clear. "I'm protecting the only thing your mother and I built our whole lives. And are you talking about freedom or money?" She went quiet, but the way she turned her face and pressed her lips, I got it. The goal wasn't freedom. It was cash. Sell the house, take a big chunk, go somewhere better. Another phrase for throwing away roots. I didn't argue. I nodded like I agreed and wiped my hands. When Renee left the kitchen, I pulled the old phone from my pocket, opened the recorder, and set it on the counter where the water still ran. Her voice was clear in the file, clear enough that no one could deny it later. When the door closed, I looked around. Everything in that room had my fingerprints. The table, the chairs, the wood floors I laid myself, the cabinets I repainted after Claudia died. Yet I felt like a guest in my own house. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the rocking chair by the window, watching snow thicken on the lawn. Each snowflake brought back a memory. The day Renee was born, the day Claudia died, the day I signed the mortgage. Everything I ever did was for one thing: to keep them under this roof. I opened the old photo album. There was Renee at 8, arms around my neck after a night shift, Claudia smiling, holding an apple pie. I turned the pages, feeling my heartbeat slow. And I asked the question every father eventually faces: when did Dad become a burden? Outside, snow kept falling. Inside, the kitchen light left a thin yellow strip on the wood floor. I leaned back, eyes closed, letting the pain cool. But deep down I knew a plan had begun. A quiet plan, no tears, no shouting, just the kind of justice saved for someone others think is useless. From that moment on, I was no longer a father begging for respect. I was Isaiah Cole, a man who lived by his hands, and I'd use those same hands to take back what's mine. I was born in Gary, Indiana, in a family with nothing but sweat and a lesson about honor. My father worked in a steel plant. My mother was a nurse. At 18, I left college because I couldn't afford tuition and followed my dad to the Joliet welding shop. The work was heavy, nights were endless, but I told myself, work hard and things will get better. I still remember the smell of oil, the crackle of sparks across steel, the sting of scorched leather gloves. My 20s lived inside 330 A.M., shifts awake with steel, asleep with dust. In the hardest stretch, I met Claudia, the woman with a smile warm as late autumn sun. She waited tables at the small diner near the shop, where I grabbed a ham sandwich before work. She called me the quiet one, and I just blushed and grinned. 3 months later, I proposed with a cheap silver ring. She laughed and said, "You don't have much, but you make people feel calm." I didn't know if that was praise or warning, because for the rest of my life I tried to keep everyone else calm except myself. Then Renee was born. That winter morning, with snow piled on the old roof, I ran 5 blocks to the hospital because my truck wouldn't start. When I held her, she fit in my 2 hands, eyes shut, skin warm and pink. I swore I'd never let her suffer, that I'd give her everything I never had. Maybe that vow is where all this started. Claudia was smart, gentle, and proud. She kept our home and worked as a bookkeeper at a small furniture store. Life was steady until she was diagnosed with heart disease. I remember the doctor saying, "Just rest," but she didn't. 3 years later, she passed, on an October afternoon with red leaves falling outside the porch. I stood by her bed holding her cooling hand and heard her last words, "Promise me. Keep Renee close." I kept my word. For 9 years, I never left Chicago, never let a day pass without calling Renee. When she married Trent, I sold my old pickup and helped with the down payment for their first apartment. When the first grandchild, Maya, arrived, then Jordan, I was right there. I fixed pipes, mowed lawns, painted walls, and when Trent lost his job, I helped with health insurance. I thought that was love, duty, keeping her close like I promised Claudia. The closer I tried to be, the wider the gap felt. When the bank rejected their mortgage application, I said right away, "I'll put it in my name. Think of it as me helping you settle. Everyone needs a place to call home." So I bought 1180 Maple Avenue with retirement money and savings I scraped together. I moved them in with the 2 kids. I stayed downstairs, they took the upstairs. At first it was warm. I laid down a soft rule: stay, grow, then be on your own. Renee laughed, hugging my shoulder. "Dad, you worry too much. I didn't know that worrying too much would be the only thing that kept me from being thrown out of my own house. Time passed and the rule faded like old paint. I became the house bank, the one who never says no. Furnace out in winter? I paid. Roof leak in spring? I paid. School supplies for Maya, medical bills for Trent. The urgent times when a car died I paid. I can't count how many times my card got swiped to cover messes they created. When I asked about paying me back, Renee would say, "I'll handle it, don't worry." I never saw a dollar. There were nights at 2 a.m. when the phone rang. Her voice shook. "Dad, I need some money. It's urgent." I drove in the rain, dropped an envelope on the table, smelled liquor, heard laughter from the living room. No thank you. Just a door closing behind me. I used to think helping family didn't need gratitude. Then one day I realized that not needing thanks is how people forget they're being helped. I kept one habit: writing down every expense. Claudia gave me a blue cloth-bound notebook on my 50th birthday, saying, "People who remember are people with roots." I used it to log gas, electric, medicine, sometimes small things like Maya's birthday cake, $12. I thought note-keeping would help me remember. I didn't know that one day the book would become a witness to the abuse of trust. That Thanksgiving night, after the table cleared, I went to my room and opened the book. Messy lines, smudged ink, over 200 pages. I traced the numbers and realized I didn't even know how much I'd given. I just knew that when they needed me, I was there. And when I needed someone, no one stood by me. I looked at the faded fingerprints on the paper and asked, when does helping turn into enabling? Was I raising dependence in the people I love? Was I saving them from hardship but stealing their chance to learn responsibility? I closed the book. Desk light glowed on the last line Claudia once wrote in purple ink: "Don't let kindness turn into a burden." I touched that line and felt a slow warmth in my chest. The night was quiet. I flipped to a new page and wrote 3 words: count every thing. Underneath, one more line, and close it. I knew I was about to do what Claudia would likely agree with. Not out of hate or anger, but because it was time to end the chain of dependency I helped create. I slid the book into the nightstand. Outside, snow fell white as the day I first held Renee, but this time it wasn't pure. It felt like a heavy blanket covering what had died but hadn't been buried. I leaned back, breathed deep. An old chapter was closing, and a quiet resolve rose in me like a small flame under cooled ash. I would no longer let others write my life. The next morning, with winter sunlight thin as paper through the curtains, I pulled the wooden table to the middle of the living room. I spread out receipts, contracts, and old bills. Dust lifted from 16 years of saved documents like smoke. A desert of paper, white, dry, heavy with unpaid promises. I sat down and started adding not just numbers, but a life that needed auditing. First, the mortgage. When I bought 1180 Maple Avenue, I put down half. The rest, $160,000, should have been shared by Trent and Renee each month. But after Trent's hours were cut, it all fell on me. $1,700 a month, then variable interest hikes. I paid like a machine. Over 16 years, principal and interest became $320,000. I wrote it down, my pen hand shaking, $320,000 like a bell ringing in my head. Next, credit cards. 3 emergencies. Once when Renee lost her wallet, once when Trent needed roof repairs, and the last when the kids need laptops for online school. I wrote $24,000. Repairs for cars. I remembered each one. Trent's old Ford, then a minivan, then a rental. 4 times I pulled cash so they could get through a tough patch. Total $14,000. Then hospital and medicine. When Trent lost coverage in 2018, I covered most of the bills, $18,000. I still had copies where I'm listed as the emergency contact. Every signature felt right at the time now No, I was signing for their dependents. School supplies, fees, summer camps for Maya and Jordan, $8,000. I remembered Renee saying, "The kids deserve what their friends have." I agreed because I wanted them to have chances I didn't. I never saw them write a thank you note. Utilities, electric, water, gas. Over 16 years, I covered $6,000 they forgot. Some months they used triple the power. And when I mentioned it, Renee laughed. "They're kids, Dad. Every room needs a light." Finally, the miscellaneous I used to ignore. Burst pipes, roof leaks, furnace, kitchen gear, a downed tree after a storm, $10,000. Afternoon light hit the table as I stared at the tangle of numbers. I added it one last time. 300, 20,000 plus, 24,000 plus 14,000 plus 18,000 plus 8,000 plus 6,000 plus 10,000 equals $400,000. I leaned back, eyes on that figure. 400. Grand. A house. An old age. A life bled dry, dollar by dollar, strength by strength, trust by trust. I looked around the room. The old sofa, the scratched coffee table, the framed photos, mine and Claudia's, now a stage for someone else's hardship and dependence. I let out a dry, stuck laugh. I wasn't angry anymore, just empty. I opened the deed. The seal was yellowed but clear. I read each line. Primary owner, Isaiah Cole. Occupants, Renee Lawson, Trent Lawson, Maya Lawson, Jordan Lawson. No line said co-owner. No signature but mine. I sat still a long time. Then I took photos of every page. I scanned them to a small USB I usually used for baseball games. Clear file names. Deed. Original. PDF. Loan. Proof. PDF. Bills. Collection. PDF. I backed it up to the cloud and shut the laptop. I put the originals in a small safe behind the bedroom closet, the one I installed when Claudia was alive. The safe clicked shut a period at the end of a long chapter. Back at the table, I opened the cloth-bound book. New page, blue ink. I wrote slowly, one word at a time. This house is mine before the law and before my conscience. I set down the pen and looked at the line like a mirror. No pride, no hate, just the final truth I needed to tell myself. Then I added a smaller line, like a note to my future self. Starting tomorrow, the bleeding stops. I closed the book, the cover thumping like a wound sealing. A space opened inside me, but it didn't hurt. It felt like a cut that had finally dried, ready to heal. Snow kept drifting onto the railing outside. Light bounced off the white, making everything strangely bright. In the quiet house, I no longer heard their noise, no arguing, no TV blaring all night, just the clock ticking steady and calm. I poured black tea and took a long breath, bitter at first, then softer as I swallowed, like waking up from a long fog. I remembered Claudia's words, "Sometimes the right way to love is to let go before you're swallowed whole." I hadn't understood for years, but looking at $400,000 fallen like dead leaves, I finally did. It wasn't that I lost money. I'd paid tuition for my last lesson. People value only what they earn. I set the cup down and turned off the desk lamp. Before heading upstairs, I looked at the table receipts lined up like evidence of kindness misread. I didn't tear them up. I left them. When this all reaches the end, they'll be the only answers I need. I climbed the stairs, palms sliding along the wood rail, smooth and cool, like the morning I placed each board, hammered each nail. This house had been a gift I built for love, and now it would stand for awakening. In the bedroom, darkness covered everything. I set the book on the nightstand and pulled up the covers, but didn't sleep yet. The last line I wrote echoed, "Starting tomorrow, the bleeding stops." Tomorrow, I didn't know my first move. But I knew one thing. I Wouldn't pay another price for ingratitude, greed, or for people who think a father's love is a bottomless well. I closed my eyes. For the first time in years, sleep came light as falling snow. In my dream, Claudia smiled, resting her hand on my shoulder, whispering, "Enough, Isaiah. It's time to keep what's left." I woke earlier than usual on Friday. The sky was a dull gray, small snowflakes falling like they were tired of winter. I brewed black coffee, set the cup down, opened the cloth-bound book and looked at last night's line. Starting tomorrow, the bleeding stops. Tomorrow had arrived. I sat a long time, hearing only the clock and the kettle. The feeling inside me was familiar and new, calm. Not the calm of giving up, the calm of finally knowing what to do. I pulled out my phone, scrolled to Avery Kim. We met almost 10 years ago when I hired her to draft a lease for a small workshop in Joliet. Korean American, early 40s, smart, practical, no fluff. I still remember what she said. Law isn't to make someone win, it's to keep the right person from being swallowed. I called. Her voice came quick and clear. "Hi, Mr. Isaiah, long time. You doing okay?" I chuckled. "Not great, but still standing. You free tomorrow morning?" 9 o'clock. Same office on the 14th floor. What's going on? The house, and my rights in my own house. A pause, then softer. All right, see you tomorrow. Saturday. I arrived early. The Kessler building downtown was all green glass reflecting snow. I sat in the lobby watching people in coats, hurrying with purpose. I realized I hadn't felt a purpose of my own in a long time, other than patching other people's lives. Avery came in quick stride, hair up, simple gray coat. She smiled. "You still look sharp. Coffee?" I brought mine. I lifted my black coffee, still warm. We went into her office overlooking Michigan Avenue. She opened her laptop, put on glasses, and got right to it. "Tell me everything." I laid it out. Disappear. Less crowded. The years of payments. The bills. She didn't interrupt, just nodded and typed. When I finished, she looked up, firm. "Mr. Isaiah, you don't need to worry. From what you've said, the house is solely in your name, right?" "I'm the only owner," I said. "My daughter and her husband just live there." "Good. Legally, they're month-to-month occupants. Without a written lease, they don't have a fixed right to stay." She turned the screen toward me, highlighting a line. "Without a written lease, the tenant may be given a 14-day notice to vacate for any lawful reason." Avery continued, "That means you can serve a legal 14-day notice to vacate. If they don't leave, you can request community officers to enforce." I breathed out lighter, but still heavy. "Only 14 days?" "Yes. But you must follow procedure. Certified mail, keep copies, take delivery photos." I leaned back, quiet, then asked, low, "Do you think this is cruel?" Avery took off her glasses and met my eyes. "Cruel is using the house you paid for with your life and acting like it's theirs. You're reclaiming what's yours. You're not stealing." I nodded, eyes stinging. It had been a long time since someone said something that simple. She printed a stack, set it neatly in front of me. Notice to vacate reason and effective date pre-filled. Sign here. I've added a move-out checklist and an inventory sheet so when they leave, you can document everything and avoid disputes. I signed steady strokes, no hesitation. Then Avery said, slowly, "Mr. Isaiah, I need to be honest. After this, your family won't go back to what it was." I gave a tired smile. "They told me to disappear. I'm doing what they asked this time, on my terms." She nodded. She slid the papers into a hard folder and handed it to me. "Keep it. Safe. Call me if they push back." "I will," I said, holding the folder heavy with memory, light in my chest. Outside, the cold hit my face. Snow thickened over Michigan Avenue. I pulled up my collar and breathed in. My spine felt straight again. Walking past a small travel agency, a poster in the window made me stop. Bold letters, Hawaii, find your peace. A golden beach, glass-clear water, an older couple holding hands at sunset. I stood still. In my head, Claudia's voice, just behind me somewhere. Retire and let's go to the ocean, Isaiah. Let's go to Hawaii. I heard the water there is so clear you can see yourself. I swallowed hard. I never promised, but in my heart, that promise lay still like a stone at the bottom of a lake. I touched the shop window. The cold bled through the glass into my skin, and somehow it made me clearer than I'd ever been. I looked back at my life, 66 years old, more than 40 years of work, 9 years a widower, 16 years in a house people treated as theirs. It was time to claim what's left of my life and our dream. I pushed the door into the travel agency. The young clerk smiled and asked, "Hello, sir, where would you like to go?" I didn't have to think. Hawaii. She typed and asked how long I wanted to stay. I glanced at the falling snow outside, then turned back. About 2 weeks. One person. She smiled. By yourself? I nodded. Yeah, but not lonely. She laughed with me and printed an info sheet. Honolulu, 14 nights. Flight. Ord to HNL. I held the paper and read the words, "Find your peace" in the bottom right corner. For the first time in years, my chest opened for a full breath. I stepped out into the white snow, but inside me, something had begun to thaw. I didn't know what would happen when I handed over that 14-day notice. There might be shouting. There might be tears. They might call me a traitor. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid. I just felt light, like I'd set down a block of steel I'd carried for half a lifetime. On the way home, I passed an old wood shop. In the display case sat a dark, hand-carved picture frame. I stopped, looked at it, and smiled. Maybe I'd come back for it and put Claudia's beach photo inside. Because starting today, I knew one thing for sure. Everything left in my life will be my choice. Monday morning, the sky was gray like metal. I sat at the computer with my phone in hand, listening to the bank's automated menu hum in my ear. A polite, slightly robotic female voice came on. "Hello, Mr. Cole, how can I help you today? I'd like to know the remaining balance on the mortgage for 1,180 Maple Avenue." "Certainly. One moment while I check. Please hold." Soft hold music played, and in that small space I looked around the room. The wall I painted myself, the family photo from Christmas 2014, the leather chair I repaired after. Trent tore it. Everything looked the same, but inside me, everything had changed. "Yes, Mr. Cole," the clerk's voice returned. "The remaining balance is $41,900, not including this month's interest. Would you like to pay it off or keep making payments?" I smiled and tapped my fingers on the desk. "I'd like to pay it in full, right now." There was a brief silence on the other end. Then she confirmed. "Of course. Would you like to make the transfer online?" "I'll transfer from my retirement fund," I said, opening a new tab. "Please confirm when you see it." On the screen, "Transfer from retirement fund." I typed the number, 41,900. At the bottom was the confirmation box beside a blue button, "Submit payment." I stared at the number for a few seconds, then clicked. A small click sounded. Then on the screen, white letters stood out on blue, "Paid in full." I don't know about you, but when those 3 words, "paid in full," appeared, it felt like I finally breathed again after decades. What about you? Reading this, do you feel lighter or do you feel hurt? I sat still, staring at those words. No fireworks, no cheering, just perfect silence. But in that silence, I felt a massive weight lift off my shoulders. This house, the symbol of sacrifice and endurance, was now truly mine. No debt. No strings. I opened my email and saw the payment confirmation. I printed a copy and clipped it to the deed in a hard folder. Carefully, I filmed a slow, steady video with my phone, panning across the table. The deed, the receipt, the confirmation email, the glowing paid in full on the screen. A simple shot, but I knew. This was proof evidence no one could twist. I put the phone down and walked the house. Light from the windows cut through the room, catching fine dust drifting in the air. I thought about how Renee might react to the notice. I didn't want a fight. I didn't want that knife in the heart scene. I wanted clarity, legality. No one could say I'd done wrong. I opened the toolbox and took out 2 tiny cameras, the kind for property security. I set one under the orchid by the living room window, clear view of the dining area. The second I tucked into Claudia's picture frame, aimed at the front walkway. Both fed into the auto backup drive on my laptop. Not to spy, just to have evidence if things spun out of control. Then I sat at the table, pulled a blank sheet, and wrote the 14-day notice. I didn't use Avery's template. I wrote it by hand, clean lines, clear tone, firm, without spite. Renee and Trent Lawson, I, Isaiah Cole, the legal owner of 1180 Maple Avenue, issue this notice requiring you and your family to vacate the premises within 14 days of receipt. This decision is not punishment. It is a necessity of law and dignity. I have paid off the remaining mortgage in full. This house has been completely paid, legal and debt-free. I ask that everything proceed in order, without conflict. I wish you both the best in finding a new path forward. Isaiah Cole. I read it again, folded it, and sealed the envelope. I added the payoff confirmation, clipped them together, and set both beneath the crystal vase Claudia loved. Renee would not miss it. Every time she cleaned the living room, she polished that vase like a symbol of Mom's elegance. Now, under that vase would be a message from a father. I stood and walked the house. I changed the Wi-Fi password and cut their device access. Then I locked the safe, turned the key twice, and hung it back on the chain around my neck. I photographed the electric, water, and gas meters and filed the images in a folder labeled Final Day. Not because I'm suspicious, but because I know when money's borders get touched, people stop being themselves. I'd seen it among co-workers, and now I saw it in my own blood. I started packing my personal things. Not much. A few changes of clothes, my meds, Claudia's notebook, our old wedding photo, and the expense ledger. I folded them into a suitcase and closed it. The room felt strangely empty after. The smell of oak and a slant of shadow remained. I stood there, hearing the floorboards creak, like I was stepping out of a chapter I'd lived too long. I booked a flight to Oahu, the largest Hawaiian island. 2 weeks. An ocean view room in Waikiki, 11th floor, balcony over water the color of jade. When I paid, the words, "Find your peace package," flashed same phrase as the poster. I chuckled. Maybe fate was lining things up. Late that night, I went out back. Snow covered the wooden bench and fence. I sat with a hot cup of tea and watched the steam rise. In my head, I heard Avery again. After this, they won't go back to how they were. I knew, and I also knew some things should never go back. I opened my phone and hit record. My voice was rough and low but steady. I'm going away. Don't call. If anyone asks, tell them I chose to live what's left my own way. Don't worry about me. Don't look for me. Live well, if you can. I saved the file as last message, M4A. The house was dead quiet. I stood and looked around one last time. The wedding photo on the wall, Claudia's gentle eyes. The crystal vase on the table. The white orchid, warm yellow light catching the curtains like the last heat of a home gone cold. I turned the lights off. The door clicked shut behind me. And in that moment, I understood. Freedom doesn't always start with a cheer. It can start with a very soft door closing. I slept deeply that night. No faces in my dreams. No knocking. The past didn't catch up. Only one feeling spread through me like a tide. Peace. Dawn hadn't fully broken when I rolled my suitcase out of the room. The house was thick with silence. I stepped carefully, skipping the seventh stair, the one that always creaked since Claudia's time. The suitcase wheels on the wood sounded like a clock ticking off a goodbye. I didn't lock the old deadbolt. I just pulled the door to, leaving the letter and the crystal vase where they were. The kitchen's dim light lay across the floor, the last glow of a life spent living for others. Outside, the air was sharp and wet. I breathed deep. Chicago winter smells like iron, smoke, and ice, that smell I've lived with for more than 40 years. I stood on the porch a moment, looking at a sleeping streetlights and a few windows lit far off. I whispered, "Goodbye, Claudia," and rolled my suitcase to the car. The drive to O'Hare took just over 30 minutes. On the expressway, my car slid past rows of yellow lights blurred by mist. The radio's morning news droned like a lullaby. I shut it off. I wanted only the wind through the window, the truest sound of leaving. At gate C-24, I sat with my back against my suitcase. Announcements echoed, wheels rattled, voices rose and fell, the baseline rhythm of departures. I checked my phone, and it began to buzz non-stop. First name on the screen, Renee. She'd read the letter. I waited a few seconds, watching the screen blink, then answered. Her voice broke like someone falling. "Dad, you can't do this. You're joking, right? We have nowhere to go. How can you throw us out on the street?" I heard her gasping, sniffling, words tangled with crying. I closed my eyes, breathed in, and spoke slowly. "I'm not throwing anyone out. I'm restoring my own rights. You have 14 days, enough time to grow up." "Dad, haven't I apologized enough?" I was angry that day. I didn't mean... I cut in. "No, Renee. That didn't come out in a 1-second temper. It came from years. I've heard enough." A long pause. Something clattered on her end, maybe her phone. Then Trent came on, voice hard and heavy. "Isaiah, you can't pull this crap. You got no heart? That house is your daughter's. To your grandkids." I let out a thin laugh. "My heart carried that house for 16 years, Trent. Now it's your turn to use your hands. Get a job. That's how a man keeps a home." "You're destroying yourself, old man," he snarled. "I'm not destroying," I said softly. "I'm just done bleeding." I ended the call as the airport speakers announced, "Flight 1712 to Honolulu now boarding at gate C-24. I powered the phone off. The silence that followed sounded like music. I stood, rolled my suitcase to the gate. The attendant scanned my ticket and smiled. As I stepped into the jet bridge, my heartbeat slowed. Light glittered on the airplane window like silver lines on a frozen river. When the plane lifted, Chicago shrank under the clouds, a silver-gray puzzle of old arteries and streets. I looked out and wondered if Renee was rereading the letter, or just crying over losing a place to live, not a father. Either way, the answers no longer mattered. Engines roared. The plane banked, climbed, and pierced a white layer of cloud. I leaned back and closed my eyes. A strange quiet settled in me, as if all the noise in my head had stayed on the ground. When the attendant came by, I chose tomato juice, something I'd never tried. Salty, a little spicy. I took a sip and felt warmth down my throat. Not delicious, but freeing. I pulled Lonesome Dove from my bag and opened to the first page. The faint paper smell and soft cabin light reminded me of nights long ago, when Claudia was alive and I read her a few pages before bed. I was still reading now, only this time to myself. Between the lines, I heard Renee's old sentence, "The best Thanksgiving gift is the day Dad disappears." But it sounded different this time. Not a curse, something like a birth certificate. Disappear, not from the world, but from the role of victim. I smiled, opened the cloth-bound notebook, and wrote a short line. I, Isaiah, am not a bank anymore. Under it, I drew a small circle like a seal on a final decision. The plane began to descend. Warm gold poured through the window. My first Honolulu sunset spread across the glass bands of orange, purple, and jade. Palm shadows stretched over the water, and a soft wind carried the scent of magnolia into the cabin vents. I breathed deep. That smell sweet, clean, with a hint of salt washed away the grease of the stove, the stench of arguments, the fatigue I'd carried from Chicago. We touched down. Tires sang. A few people clapped behind me. I unbuckled and grabbed my suitcase. My chest was quiet, no heaviness left. I stepped out, and the island's first wind hit my face warm, salty, real. I closed my eyes and let it pass through my hair. For the first time in years, I smiled for no one and nothing except that I was still alive. On my first morning in Honolulu, I woke before full light. A silver wash pushed through the curtains with the sound of waves, pulsing in the distance. Unlike Chicago's cold machinery, Hawaii's ocean had its own heartbeat, something alive, breathing, inviting me in. I opened the balcony door and warm air rushed in salt, magnolia, a touch of early sun. After decades of grit, smoke, and arc-weld hiss, my body felt human again. Breakfast was simple, a cup of Kona coffee and toast. Then I decided to do what Claudia once said she wanted to try. Surfing. She used to joke, "If you ever stand on a board, I'll come back from heaven to see it." I kept that promise, 9 years late. My instructor was Kaleo, a Hawaiian kid whose smile came as easy as breath, brown skin gleaming, eyes bright. He called me Uncle Isaiah after he heard my age, then grinned. Uncle, falling is part of the fun. We started at Waikiki. The water was glass. I stepped in cool sand underfoot, waves nudging my knees. Kaleo showed me how to stand, how to balance, then shouted, "Paddle, paddle." I tried and wiped out in seconds. He laughed, clapped my shoulder. "Uncle, good fall. Falling means you tried." We trained all morning. I fell more than I stood, and each fall made me laugh louder. The ocean was salty and sharp, but I didn't mind. It rinsed away road dust and years of bracing through pain. By noon, I crawled back onto the beach, soaked, shoulders sore, heart light. Kaleo handed me a can of coconut water. "No one learns waves on day one," he said. "But today you learn not to fear the water." I smiled. Kind of like I just learned not to fear living. Day 2, I got up early and climbed Diamond Head. The trail was rough, but every step felt sure. I moved slow, breathed deep, sweat on my brow without any shame in it. At the top, the sun broke, pouring gold over the ocean, sparking on every swell. Wind tore around my ears, shirt stuck to my back, heart pounding. Strangely, I wasn't tired. I just felt lighter. I sat and looked out. My Chicago was across that ocean where cold wind cut skin and old memories used to anchor me. But up here, on an extinct crater, I felt like a man just out of a half-life storm. I thought of Claudia. I closed my eyes and pictured her beside me, hands on her hips, laughing. "If you made it up here, heaven must be surprised." I laughed to myself and answered into the wind. "I'm climbing for you." Claudie. That afternoon I ate at a little poke place off the sidewalk. The owner, a local woman with gray hair and a flower lei, served me fresh tuna with ginger soy over warm rice. The fish melted cool, clean, a little heat. I ate slowly, eyes closed, and the taste felt like an apology from life. Gentle, simple, no speech needed. I sat there a long time, watching people go by, hearing the waves on the rock jetty. No one knew who I was. No one asked about my past. The freedom was so pure it almost made me tear up. Later, I found shade under a palm by the beach. Breeze steady, sand warm. I lay back, hand on my chest, listening to my heart clearly. I turned my phone completely off. No standby, no checking messages. For the first time in decades, I left it off for 2 straight days. No calls from Renee. No, Dad, Can you send more? No bank alerts, only waves, wind, and on the third night, I went to a luau. Fire snapped and threw sparks, the smell of grilled meat and plumeria mixed in the dark. Dancers swayed hula, spinning torches. I sat in the crowd with firelight on my face, watching the flames circle like time running backward. When they invited people to dance, I stood. My steps were slow, my back a bit stiff, but I smiled and let the fire shine in my eyes. Drums pounded, and suddenly I remembered Claudia without the stab of pain, just gratitude. She was gone, but her gentlest part was still here in me in the way I could still smile and feel a song in a place I'd never known. On day 4, I met an older couple from California at a small cafe by the water. His name was Ray, hers, Linda, both past 70, hair white, eyes bright as spring. We talked about the ocean, kids, and how old age isn't the end but a chance to begin differently. Ray lifted his cup. Better late than never. I almost couldn't leave the house after retiring. Linda pulled me off the couch. Now I see life's still good if you stand up for it. I smiled. I think someone just pulled me up too. Linda tilted her head. Who? I looked out at the sea. Maybe me. We all laughed. They invited me to the fish market tomorrow. I said yes. In the pale gold of sunset, they walked away hand in hand. I watched them go, feeling light as air. That night, I opened the cloth-bound notebook. The paper had curled a little in the ocean air, but the ink held. I wrote, "Happiness doesn't need anyone's permission." I paused and looked at the line. It wasn't a quote. It was a thing I was finally living. Then I opened my laptop and sent Avery a short email. Avery, please, confirm. I'll return to Chicago on day 15, right after the 14-day mark. See you at the office that week. I didn't call Renee. I knew she'd still text, still say, Dad, don't be so cold. But no, I wasn't explaining anymore. If something needs explaining, they never really listened. I closed the computer and sat on the balcony. Waves tapped the shore. Wind whispered through the palms. I breathed in, and for the first time in many years, I heard my own breath slow, even unhurried. I didn't need to prove I was right. I didn't need an apology. I just needed to keep this quiet. And in that quiet, I understood. Life can still be gentle to those who know when to stop. I left Honolulu on a soft, rainy morning and flew to the big island, the largest in Hawaii. The sky looked sifted with ash. As we descended, the world below appeared. Black lava ribbons curling through green forest, like giant scars time hadn't healed. I looked through the window and felt both strange and at home because in each burn I saw my own years. I rented a silver Jeep Wrangler, high clearance, removable top. The rental clerk asked if I needed GPS. I shook my head. No, I just want one direction up the mountain. The road to Hawaii Volcanoes National Park twisted between rainforest and black rock. Mist beaded on the windshield and slid slowly. I turned on the radio and heard a simple ukulele song about ocean, wind, and souls finding their way home. It softened my chest. When I arrived, I got out and breathed deep. The air was thick with sulfur sharp, a little acrid, like the welding smoke of my youth. The ground felt warm and damp, like the earth itself was breathing. I took the trail through a patch of forest, and then Kilauea opened before me. The crater yawned like a massive wound. Inside, red lava churned and flowed, smoke rising in heavy waves. That red like the earth's arteries, like the heartbeat of something ancient waking up after a long sleep. I stood silent, unable to speak. A ranger passed, saw me standing there and paused. "First time here, sir?" "I've seen fire," I said. "I've never seen it alive." He smiled and looked out at the crater. "People are scared of it, but it doesn't just destroy. It destroys to create. Every eruption burns away dead forest. The ash cools into new soil. Then grass grows again. Fire has its reasons." I nodded. I understood. Some things in life have to burn so something else can grow. I opened the cloth-bound notebook and wrote on a fresh page. To build new, you have to burn the dead forest inside. I stopped and looked at the line, feeling something in me release. For years, I've clung to old memories, tired relationships, promises. With no pulse, they'd become dead wood waiting for a spark. Standing here, I let the fire in me burn clean, just once. Mountain wind rose, cold rain stung my face. I pulled my jacket tighter and watched steam lift from the crater, listening to wind hiss and lava seethe. In that moment, I felt small but not weak. If anything, I felt claimed by life, life that keeps moving, even after it's been broken. The smell of sulfur took me back to Chicago winters when the gas system acted up and the house filled with fumes. I used to pay the bill every month, quietly enduring that smell, afraid that if I didn't, the whole house would freeze. Now I stood here, in the earth's real smoke, and I didn't feel suffocated anymore. This fire wasn't asking me for another bill, it was asking me to admit that I needed to shed my old skin. I took out my phone and snapped one photo, just one. No selfie, no filters, no posting. I kept it for myself. A photo of truth, no show, no likes. Just proof that I had stood here, where the world was destroying itself to begin again. On the way back to the hotel, the road was soaked, steam lifting in a haze. I turned on the fan, cracked the window, and let cool air pour in. In my head, thoughts began lining up like trees after a storm. I saw everything more clearly than ever. I thought of the house in Chicago, 1180 Maple Avenue with oak walls, an old shingle roof, and the arguments that used to echo through dinner. I understood that the house was no longer a home, just the shell of an old dream. It used to stand for sacrifice. Now it was only a keepsake of exhaustion. I had paid it off. I had done my part. There was no reason to hold on to it. I opened my digital notebook to notes. Bullet points popped up, neat and calm. 1. Contact. Avery asked about the process to sell or to set up a long-term rental. 2. Get a market valuation check, Zillow and property taxes. 3. Estimate broker fees and transfer taxes. 4. Make a 90-day plan to complete the paperwork. 5. Buy or rent a smaller place in the South, somewhere sunny, near the ocean. I looked at the list and felt my mind as clear as freshly cleaned glass. No more fog. No more tangles. Only simple clarity. I don't want to die in a place full of painful memories. I want to live where the light touches my skin every morning. The car rolled downhill, the rain eased, the clouds broke, and a rainbow stretched across the distance. I chuckled and muttered, maybe the earth is co-signing my retirement. Back at the hotel, I opened my laptop and emailed Avery. Avery, I'd like to discuss listing the house for sale or for rent. Let's set a meeting when I'm back. I'm ready to sign. I hit send, leaned back, and closed my eyes. I didn't know exactly what the future would be, but I knew one thing for sure. Everything was moving the right way. Outside the window, the night sea rippled. Wind slipped through the curtains with salt and flowers. I heard my heartbeat slow, steady like the distant drums at that first luau. I opened my notebook and added one short line. The day I disappear is the day I come home. And I understood that it no longer meant running away. I wasn't disappearing from the world, just from the version of me that was used, wounded, and silent. I was coming back to the man Claudia loved, to the man I'd forgotten for years. I set down the pen and looked out into the night. Far off, the volcano still glowed like a red heart. I whispered, "Thank you, Kilauea. Thank you for teaching me that sometimes burning isn't the end. It's the start of being alive again." On December 14th, I got an email from Avery. The subject was just 3 words: all set, reminder. She attached the proof of delivery for the 14-day notice postal stamp, signature of receipt, R. Lawson. I looked at the image and felt nothing ripple. Things had gone exactly where they needed to go. No gloating, no triumph, just the truth being carried out. Avery added a few lines. I've prepared the inventory template and the enforcement report if they don't move out. When you return, just follow the procedure. Don't say more. Don't explain. I read that last sentence again. Don't explain. It felt like something Claudia told me long ago. She used to say, if someone believes, they don't need to hear it. If they don't, nothing you say matters. I closed the laptop and sat for a while. Outside on the balcony, Waikiki's lights shimmered on the sea. Couples walked hand in hand along the sand, leaving prints the waves erased. Maybe life is like that, except I'd spent too many years watching waves erase my tracks without standing up to walk on. The next morning, I sat by the hotel window, opened my notebook, and started a list for my return. Not a revenge list, a boundary plan. 1. Schedule the locksmith. I called a shop out by Joliet and picked a date right after the legal deadline. I told them, don't change the locks before that day. Do it by the book. I don't want anyone saying I broke the law. The locksmith asked, high security style? I answered, doesn't have to be fancy, just peace of mind. 2. Prepare the inventory. I opened Avery's files and started filling them out. Mine, the rocking chair, the oak cabinet, Claudia's albums, the crystal vase, the wedding frame. Theirs, the new sofa, the TV, the electric range, the kids' toys. I added, photograph each room before and after handover. With a family that treated kindness as automatic, evidence is the last form of respect. 3. Contact a realtor. I called Derek, an agent I'd met through an old friend. He sounded cheerful. Mr. Cole, long time. Are we selling or renting? I'm considering both. I need a quick valuation. I might not be there anymore. No problem. I'll come shoot photos and send comps. Great location if it's cleared out. We'll get a good price. I smiled. I'm clearing it. I didn't say clearing people, just clearing. Derek didn't need to know. 4. Open a separate account. I logged into the bank and opened a new account solely for the property. No joint access, no authorizations. From now on, all utilities and insurance flow through this account. I wrote in my notebook, cut off all vague emergencies. No more, Dad. Help me one last time. I remembered Avery saying, the law can't heal feelings, but it can stop the bleeding. I was doing exactly that. 5. Write to Maya and Jordan. On a small sheet I wrote, slow and careful. Dear Maya and Jordan, Grandpa is always here, not in the house, but in your hearts. When you choose to call, I'll answer. Love, Grandpa Isaiah. I folded the note, slipped it into a brown envelope and marked, leave after things are settled. I don't know when they'll understand, but love doesn't need instant proof. It only needs to be written so it won't vanish. 26. Prepare for the worst. I wrote, if they don't move out, call community officers to witness and file a report. No arguing, no touching anyone. If they move out but strip the place, stay calm. File a claim for losses. Keep what matters. Journals, Claudia's keepsakes, bank records, wedding photos. I touched the chain around my neck with the safe key. Whatever happens, as long as I keep that, I'm still whole. In the afternoon, I walked Waikiki's shore, fine sand threading between my toes. The sun dipped, pouring honey gold over the water. I sat on a wooden stool and ordered a rum and pineapple. The bartender asked if I wanted lime. I shook my head. No need. I've had enough sour. I took a sip, the warmth spreading across my tongue. For the first time in years, I drank without thinking of anyone. Not to forget, not to endure, just to enjoy the moment I was in. An older couple walked by, hands clasped, smiles warm. I didn't feel that old pinch of envy. I felt peace, knowing I once had someone like that. And in a way, Claudia was still here in the wind I breathed, in the way a sip of rum could make me soften. I opened the notebook and wrote the day's final line. I'm not taking revenge. I'm drawing a line. I stared at it for a long time. Boundaries, something I used to think belonged to the young, to people who knew how to say no on time. Now I understood it's never too late to put a fence around your heart. On my last night in Waikiki, I stepped onto the balcony. The air carried salt and plumeria. Below, the sea murmured. City lights stitched gold threads across the water. I lifted the half-finished drink and murmured, "Claudia, I'm on my feet now." The wind answered with a soft hush, like someone smiling in the dark. I closed my eyes and let the waves sink with my heartbeat. No fear of tomorrow, no worry about what anyone thinks. I knew that when the plane touched down in Chicago, the man who walked off wouldn't be the one left behind in his own house. I drained the glass, set it on the railing, and whispered the night's last words. Tomorrow I'm going back not to relive the past. I'm going back to protect the future. The plane landed at O'Hare near 4 p.m. The windows fogged, snow falling steady and thick, covering the ground like white paper. Chicago greeted me with the cutting cold I knew so well I hardly needed a heavy coat. I pulled my suitcase out of the terminal, breath turning to smoke. Maybe nowhere else is so harsh and so familiar as this city where I lived, lost, and am learning to live again. On the ride home, the cab rolled past familiar blocks. Every window glowed amber. Christmas trees were already up behind glass. I remembered other years, when I picked gifts for each grandchild, bought Renee an expensive perfume, bought Trent a watch he never wore. This time, I brought back a small suitcase, some clothes, the cloth-bound notebook, and Claudia's old photo album. What remained was enough to start my life again. When the car turned onto Maple Avenue, my heartbeat slowed. The street lay under a fine white sheet. Bare branches lined both sides. Streetlights painted thin gold bands on the snow. Number 1180 appeared quiet as an old picture. I paused at the gate and breathed deep. It was a strange feeling coming home and stepping into a place that once belonged to someone else. In the front, Trent's car was gone. The gray Ford SUV he always parked crooked across the walk gone. I looked at the empty space and felt my chest lighten, not joy relief, like shaking the last stone out of my pocket. I turned the key. The new lock smelled like clean metal. When the latch clicked, a cold draft spilled out with the scent of old wood, old coffee, and a little emptiness. Inside, I stopped. The house was bare. Their sofa, TV, dining table, bookcase, everything of theirs was gone. I wasn't angry. I'd prepared for this. I walked through the living room past scuffs where heavy furniture used to sit. Dim light slanted through the window and caught a thin skin of dust. I looked around. In the corner sat the only thing left, the walnut rocking chair Claudia gave me for my 50th. I went to it and laid my hand on the armrest. The little scratch she scolded me about when I put it together was still there. I touched it and sat down. The chair creaked like it knew its old owner. On the fridge, a note pinned with a magnet, written in Renee's hand. "You chose money over family." I stood a moment. Her handwriting was still pretty, even familiar, but the words felt like a dull knife, no longer capable of cutting, just leaving a faint sting. I pulled the note down, read it once more, and smiled sadly. I tore it in half and said quietly, "No, I chose me instead of being used." I crumpled it and tossed it in the trash. The dry thud echoed and I felt light. Maybe for the first time in years, I'd finally said it to myself. I took out my phone and dialed Avery. She picked up fast, sounding upbeat. "Mr. Cole, everything okay? I just got back. The house is empty. No problems." "Good. Then we move to valuation. I'll loop Derek to schedule photos and send over the brokerage agreement this week. Sell or rent?" I looked around at the room, the empty frame on the wall where our family photo used to hang. I answered softly, "Sell. It's time. You're sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything." She paused, then said quietly, "Claudia would be proud." I smiled. I think she's already smiling. After the call, I went to the windows. The glass was icy. I opened every one by one, letting cold wind rush in and sweep the living room, the stairs, the kitchen. The whistle through the cracks sounded like the house exhaling. I wanted to blow out the stench of blame and bickering that had clung to our dinners. No more Renee's voice. No more Trent's footsteps. No more angry clatter of forks and knives. Only wind and snow. In the kitchen, I plugged in the coffee maker. Old, but still working, the gift Claudia gave me on our 25th anniversary. I filled the water, poured the beans, and pressed the button. The familiar ticking started. The smell of coffee rose rich and spread through the room. I stood there with my eyes closed, breathing it in. That bitter scent was the smell of my home. Not the smell of a meal Renee cooked to get it over with. Not the deodorizer Trent sprayed to hide smoke. The smell of the mornings Claudia and I once shared, before life started rolling like a brakeless wheel. I poured a cup and sat in the rocker. Through the window, snow kept falling. Streetlight made the flakes glow soft white. I took the first sip. The bitter hit, then softened into sweet. I sat a long time, listening to the wind and the clock. No calls, no texts, no requests or demands. Just me and the house, and a rare, steady calm. I looked around. I didn't need anyone to tell me where Claudia was, somewhere in the wind. Outside, in the slow sway of the chair, in the warmth rising from the cup, I smiled and whispered, "I'm home, Claudie. But this time, I'm home for real." And as the words faded, I understood. For the first time in years, I was sitting in my own house without owing anyone emotionally. No debt, no fake gratitude, no forced silence, just me and the rest of a life that had finally been paid in full. I leaned back. The wood creaked softly. The windows stayed open. A few flakes drifted in, melted on the floor, and vanished. The light thinned. The clock chimed 6. I took another sip and drew a deep breath. Bitter but true. The house was quiet, but this time it was the quiet of freedom. The first morning after I returned to Maple, I woke to a gray sky. Winter light slipped through the curtains like a breath. I brewed coffee, sat at the old kitchen table, and opened the laptop. The house now echoed with keystrokes instead of arguments. I started my life after 66. Planned not a will, a how to live. First, I worked with Derek, the realtor. He sent me 3 pricing paths, each with clear advice. The market's solid this year, Mr. Cole. After taxes and fees, if you sell outright, you'll net about $470,000. Enough to buy a small place near Lake Michigan and still have a travel fund. I looked at the numbers on the screen and they didn't hurt the way balances used to. Derek went on, or you could do a long-term rental. This area's good, about $2,000 a month for steady cash flow. I thought for a moment, sipped my coffee, then said, "Prep both options. I want a few weeks to consider." He chuckled. "Having choices is the best freedom, my friend." I smiled. He was right. All my life, I'd chosen for others, carried for others, paid for others. Now, I was choosing for me. That afternoon, I walked by the lake. The surface was frozen, but the sky was clear. A small, south-facing apartment building was going up nearby, sunlight pouring into new windows. I stood there a long while, eyeing a sign. Now leasing, cozy living, Lakeview Apartments. I thought how, in a warm, sunny unit near the lake, I could make morning coffee looking out at the water, walk to a joint care class in the afternoon, read at night. No one asking to borrow, no one knocking, no one demanding my silence. A life finally small enough to be peaceful. That evening, I opened my email. There was a note from the old welding shop where I spent more than 3 decades. The former foreman, Rick, wrote, Isaiah, heard you fully retired. If you're up for it, we need a part-time advisor for the kids. You pick the shift, pick the projects, no pressure. They need someone who knows the trade. I smiled as I read. Metal, sweat, smoke. What once wore me down now felt familiar. I wrote back, short. Okay, Rick, I'll come in 2 days a week. Not for the money, just to remember I'm still useful. I hit send. For a moment, an old part of me woke up, not the tired part, the part that knows the worth of working hands. I opened my notebook and sketched a new cash flow map. At the top I wrote, income, sale or rent part-time shop savings interest. Expenses, small home travel Claudia's trade grant. At the bottom I underlined, live enough, not excess give while I'm still clear-minded. I took out a photo of Claudia by the ocean when we were young, her hair flying in the wind. I set it in front of me and said softly, Claudie, I'm setting up a small fund in your name to help kids in our neighborhood learn welding. Not everyone gets college, but everyone deserves a trade. I copied the line onto paper with a title, Claudia's Craft Grant. Seeing that name warmed my chest. I pictured the young men and women getting that little scholarship, a few $1,000s to start a life. Not much, but enough to let them know someone once believed in them. That night, I wrote a private letter to Renee, not to reconcile, and not to accuse. I kept it short, each sentence like a stitch tight but without drawing blood. Renee, I don't blame you, but I hope you understand love is not the same as a financial obligation. Helping is a choice, not a duty. Every action has consequences, and this is the consequence of years of silence. I hope you learn to stand on your own feet, because leaning on others forever is a way to weaken yourself. I still pray for you every morning. Isaiah. I read it again and felt calm. No anger, no hope for a reply. I folded it, slipped it into an envelope and wrote, send only when ready. Maybe one day, when we're both calm enough, the letter will reach my daughter. But if it doesn't, it will still have done what it needed to do. Help me forgive without anyone asking for forgiveness. In the cloth-bound notebook, I set aside a page for Maya and Jordan. I wrote clearly, whenever you want, knock. Grandpa will open the door. No apology needed, only honesty. Grandpa's house still has 2 empty chairs at the table. I know the kids will grow up. They'll understand that love doesn't disappear, it just waits to be found again. And I want to leave them an invitation, not a lecture. That weekend, I built a small wooden box. I cut, planed, and waxed it by hand. Each grain grew shinier under my fingers. I carved a small line inside the lid. For Claudia, my home within. Inside, I placed our wedding photo, 2 old plane tickets from our first beach trip, and her favorite necklace. I called it a portable altar. Wherever I go, I'll take it. Because I don't believe people are gone completely. I believe as long as we remember, they're still living warmed by memory. That afternoon, I sat in the rocking chair, opened my laptop and booked Hawaii for next fall. Same old hotel in Waikiki, ocean, view room. I called it the promise-keeping trip, a promise to Claudia and to myself that I will never stop living just because I'm afraid of being alone. When the payment went through, the line appeared. Reservation confirmed, September 14. I smiled. The exact date of our wedding. Maybe fate always finds a gentle way to smile back at those who know how to wait. Late in the evening, I walked to the community center near home. On the bulletin board was a notice, joint mobility and gentle meditation class for ages 60 and up, Mondays, Wednesdays, Fridays. I signed up immediately. Not to extend my lifespan, but to keep my body a sturdy house. Because I understand, the body is a second home, and if it collapses, no plan means anything. At the first class, the young instructor guided us through each movement. When I stretched my shoulders and my back creaked, The whole group burst out laughing. I laughed too. No shame, no weariness. I just felt present. Back home, I had a simple dinner, vegetable soup and toast. I put on some jazz and poured a little red wine. The desk lamp cast a warm trail of light on the wall. I opened the notebook and wrote the last line of the day. I'm learning to say no and to choose slowly on each small happiness. No more rushing, no more fear of being misunderstood. I only need to wake up tomorrow knowing I still have a reason to smile. Outside, snow began to fall. I looked through the window as a chill spread across the glass. Inside, the smell of coffee lingered, and the wooden box on the table glowed gently under the light. And I knew that at 66, my life was finally beginning for real. On the day I signed the deposit, the air was cold but clear. Snow on the roof melted into tiny glittering drops. I arrived early and stood before 1180 Maple Avenue, the house my life had circled for nearly all my years, working, paying, fixing, keeping, and enduring. Today, it was no longer a burden. It was a chapter completed. Derek, the realtor, waved from his car. I waved back and asked him to wait a few minutes. I wanted to walk the house alone. I opened the door and the cold rushed in. Inside, the afternoon light tilted through the curtains, laying long golden bars on the wood floor. I walked slowly through each room, the living room, the kitchen, the hall, the stairs, the room Renee used when she was little. Each place had its own sound: laughter, anger, silence stretched to suffocation. But now, there were only my footsteps and the wind. I touched the living room wall where the family photo used to hang and whispered, "Thank you for holding everything. Thank you for the meals that smelled of burned butter, the sleepless nights, the angers that never made it to an apology. Thank you for teaching me that love isn't always keeping and letting go isn't always losing." I stepped into the kitchen. On the counter was Claudia's crystal vase. I lifted it, an object that once pinned the 14-day notice to the table of fate. Back then, my hands shook. Now, they were steady as in my youth. I wiped a thin film of dust from the rim, then pulled a red carnation from my pocket, bought on the way here. The flower Claudia liked because they're patient and last longer than roses. I set it in the vase and placed it back on the table. "For you," I murmured, "so this house has something truly alive." I took one last look. The house was quiet, but not cold. It was no longer a place of hurt now. It was a witness to a man who finally learned to stand up straight. When I went outside, Derek was reviewing the paperwork. He asked, "Anything you want to say before we sign?" I smiled. "I've said enough in my head. Let's sign." The pen slid lightly across the page. One blue line closing out 16 years of ups and downs. I looked at the figure's deposit, fees, the remainder to be wired in a few weeks. A block of $400,000 slipped out of my life, light as an exhale. I held the keys and turned back to the door that had carried me through half a life. I said softly, like to myself, "I don't need forgiveness from Renee in order to live. Forgiveness is not a pass. It's just a way for someone to claim the right to keep hurting you." I paused, drew a long breath, and added, "Stepping away from being someone else's foundation isn't selfish, it's healthy." I closed the door. The lock clicked firm, but gentle. I handed the keys to Derek. He shook my hand and said, "I hope you find a calmer place." I answered, "I don't need to find it. I'm already there." My new apartment sits on the 5th floor of a small building near the lake. White walls, light wood floors, big windows drinking in the sun. In the morning, sunlight pours over the sill, warm enough for a cup of black tea without a sweater. I set a new white orchid by the window, the only thing I brought from Maple. When the breeze comes, its petals tremble, like the breath of someone newly alive. I sat at the table, opened the cloth-bound notebook to a blank first page. I took up the pen and wrote, "My name is Isaiah Cole. The rest of my life belongs to me." I stopped, looked at the line and smiled. No theatrics, no applause, no witnesses. But I knew this was the moment I was born again. At night, I put on the old song Claudia loved, "What a Wonderful World." The melody floated, soft as the warm light in the room. I poured a little red wine and sat by the window. Outside, the snow fell lightly, reflecting the streetlights into tiny, bright grains. I thought of Renee, of Maya and Jordan. Maybe one day they'll understand, maybe not, but that no longer decides my worth. I've done my part. Love, endure, forgive, and leave. And sometimes, leaving is the last way to love. I closed the notebook and set down the pen. In the small room, the air was still, with only the clock ticking and the wind moving through the trees outside. I felt at peace, the kind of peace I used to think only belonged to other people. I sipped the tea, just a hint of bitterness. No longer the sting of disappointment, only the truth of being alive. If you've stayed with me this far, thank you, truly, for giving time to the story of an old man who once thought his life was over but found out it had only just begun again. Maybe you're listening from a small room at night, or in a car on a long road. Wherever you are, I hope you remember this. It is never too late to choose yourself. Don't wait for someone to grant you permission to rest, to say enough, or to step out of the place that makes you feel small. The moment you just once say enough, life opens a path. Leave me a comment and tell me where you're listening from and what made you choose to stand up after years of bowing your head. If this story reached you, please like, subscribe, and stay for the next stories because, who knows, the next stand might be yours.